All right, howdy everyone. Welcome back to another video here from Top Comics Pressing. In this video, what I want to do is just go over a review of the brand new official CGC guide to grading comics. So I received that in the mail this week, and I finally had time to look it over a couple of times, digest it, and I wanted to share my initial review here of the book. So as you can see right off the bat, it's a pretty thick book. It actually contains quite a number of beautiful full-page color pictures, which are quite nice, and a number of these are going to be quite insightful, I think, to a lot of people. And so, you know, my initial gut reaction is that this book was worth my roughly $30. I think I paid for it, and I think they charged me $10 for shipping. So out of pocket, it was about 40 bucks. And overall, I'm happy with it. It's got a lot of sections. It provides a lot of information, and so they have, you know, you can just see that in the table of contents. It's a nice long list here of things that go through 7 sections, and it's subdivided, and there's a lot of detail both on the history of comics. So you can see here pictures of some of the most famous comics of all time, along with some of the details on how comics were printed, as well as some of the you know, key structural elements that make up a comic book. And so overall, I think it's a great addition to the community, and I think it'll provide a lot of value to newcomers and ideally to some veteran collectors as well. That being said, I think that there are some areas that could definitely be improved upon, and I'll try to highlight those for you here as we flip through the book. One of the things that I wanted to point your attention to is, you know, as a comic book presser, they have a really nice section here about where defects come from and what kind of defects you have, and they call comic book pressing enhancements, as well as some restorative techniques and conservation. And so all of these things get kind of lumped together under a new terminology of enhancement, which is a term I had not heard before. And, you know, you can kind of see the original, and then this was, you know, professionally restored. So that was quite nice to at least see the vocabulary added. They do a decent job of going through their grading scale, both for the numeric scores that you see on the top of the slab, but also some of the issues with page quality and page color. One of the things I was a little disappointed in, though, is for how important page quality can be, particularly to older books. You can see that these pictures are incredibly hard to interpret, if not just downright impossible. So I can tell that that one's whiter than this one, but I can't tell you the difference between the tan and the slightly brittle, or the cream to off-white and the tan necessarily. This one, you can see that there is a distinct tan border here with an off-white interior. So at least that one I can get something out of, but the rest of these pictures leave me scratching my head, especially if you want me to line a book up to that to know which level of page quality I've got. So they obviously have a whole section on how to grade a comic book, which is nice, and this is unsurprising because that's really the point of the book. But, you know, I've already done one video that I'll post on how I grade books, and one of the things I say in there is that just because a book has some defects, it doesn't mean that those defects impact the grade. And so the CGC they do define in here 2 different approaches to arriving at a grade. So one of which is the subtractive method that I think is intuitive to a lot of people, where you kind of start at the perfect 10.0 and you make a list of the defects and you subtract off points for each of those defects. The other is a kind of a consensus approach where it's a little bit wishy or washy, especially in the middle to low range, and they kind of call that out right here instead, or explicitly. So here's a sentence that drew my attention. Instead, a grade must be arrived at by assessing the most severe defects and the overall presentation of the book. And so this gets to the subjectivity of comic book grading, but I think it also highlights that, you know, if you have one really big major defect, the small little defects aren't really going to impact that at all. And they use this side by side of 2 copies of Batman #1, a phenomenal golden age true classic, and both of these received a 2.0 grade. And visually at first glance, this one looks a lot nicer than this one that's missing some chunks out of here and there, and then the top corner. And they spent some time explaining how you can have a 2.0 even though these books look quite significantly different. There's a little bit here encouraging you to look at the entirety of the book, so that's something that you'll see in my grading videos, is counting pages and checking for these pesky Marvel value stamps. You'll also, oh yeah, so here's the narrowing method and the subtractive method. So those are covered here on page 69, so I encourage you to read about those. I think that that's one of the more useful things to have explicitly stated to the community in the book that I found here. So a good chunk of the book has a lot to do with index of defects and enhancements. And so here you can see a lot of common grade or comic book defects got their own page, which is really awesome. And most of these, or sorry, all of these pages have a number of really nice photographs on them, which kind of, I think, is important to identifying what we're considering a defect of some kind. And that's fantastic. I will say I was left a little disappointed in this section because some of the grade ranges that they give are just super broad, and there's absolutely no clarity there for anybody who expects to buy this book and to be able to use this book to assign a grade to a comic book that's right in front of them. You're never going to be able to do that from this book. So, and the reason for that is, you know, they're giving grade ranges like a 6.5 to a 9.8. Well, that's, you know, literally a third of the entire scale, and it's even broader for staining. So I think their one for staining goes from 1.0 to 9.8, which is just absolutely ridiculous from a scale. And they don't provide a whole lot of, you know, detail as to why a book might receive one and not the other. So and to highlight the ambiguity, I think that they introduced, so something like a detached cover to me is pretty objective. So a lot of people in the community will throw around that grading is subjective, and that's for sure the case. But certainly something like a detached cover is objective. That is, the cover is either attached or it's detached. And because of that, we should be able to give a maximum grade that a book could get with a detached cover. They kind of do that and tell you it's a 5.0, but they also kind of tell you it's typically a 4.0. And if you go to this wonderful table that they have on page 249, which, by the way, I think is one of the most important parts of the book, they tell you, if you actually look here, so detached cover, you can go over here, and if you line that up, it's actually a 4.5. And so because of that, you know, if you have a beautiful copy in front of you with a detached cover, you're not going to be able to assign it a CGC grade. You're going to say, well, it could be a 5.0, maybe it's going to be a typical book at a 4.0, and maybe it'll be at a 4.5 if you're using this table in the back. And so to me, there's absolutely no clarity there for something that should be an objective grade. And I'm saying that as somebody who understands that, yes, a cover detached is only one of the defects that might be present on the book, but at least the ceiling should be very clear. And there should be at least some clarity as to how I get a 5.0 with the detached cover versus a 4.0 versus a 4.5. Or at least the grid in the back should match up to the text in the book. So at least, you know, I think that there's something missing there. And I find that to be the same true with foxing. So foxing is a very common defect. It appears in a lot of books, and the range that's given is 4.0 to 9.6. Well, that's a massive range, right? The fair market value of a book graded at a 4.0 is going to be miles apart that of a 9.6. And, you know, for something like foxing, CGC already has a vocabulary built into their grader notes. They will call something minor foxing, light foxing, moderate foxing, heavy foxing, whole book foxing, right? And so when you get a book that has foxing and it has that in the grader notes, usually there's some indication about how severe of foxing that is. And it would have been really nice to see a picture here of each of those terminology as they're baked into CGC's grader note vocabulary already, with perhaps a ceiling that you'd get with that level of foxing. Because unfortunately, you know, if you're a newcomer and you're hoping to buy this book and you're hoping to be able to use this book to grade a book in front of you to anticipate what grade you'll get from CGC, you're not going to be able to do that because you're going to say, well, it's somewhere between a 4.0 and a 9.6. And there's very little here to really help you clarify that. There's a little paragraph, but it's not enough really, I don't think, to narrow that range. So if I had a criticism of this book, I think that would be it. All right, I did find the table here that I already talked about on page 249 to be helpful, so I'll call that out to you again if you own one. And one of the other things that I thought was helpful is they spend a good amount of time talking about restoration, a little bit on restoration detection, but mostly on what it looks like, and they have some nice charts on what can be removed and what impacts you can look for to try to detect restoration. So that's nice, and there's a bunch of that. All right, if you're a big Hulk 181 fan, you'll love this book because it has scans and readouts of every grade possible on the CGC census, from a 10.0 perfect gem mint Hulk 181, which has got to be one of the most prized comic books on the planet, And they have some really nice expansions here for each of these that show you exactly how they're getting at that along the bottom. So you can see this, and they have some text under there. So at least that was helpful to me in trying to compile these grades that you can see, and that you can see that they do have that for each one of these. And so this is going to be your best bet if you're actually trying to learn how to grade a comic book, is probably to go through this section on the Hulk 181s and try to interpret what they're trying to tell you, both in the text and in the pictures and in the text underneath here. And so that's quite useful. And you can see, you can go all the way back down here to 0.0, very poor condition Hulk 181. So this one's clearly missing text and paper under there. It was likely burned. And then this one just looks like an incredibly rough, beaten up copy. All right, and then they have a couple of sections I personally didn't get a whole lot of value out of. So they have one section on foreign editions, which I don't collect. I'm based in the US and I stick to the US print. They have a whole section on pedigrees, which is not really my bag. And so I'll leave that to you for the pedigree collectors out there. Those are usually books outside of my pocket range. And there's a whole section on some of the other like the labels, and they'll give you a history of the labels, and that's, I guess, important to be in the book, but it's not something I followed. All right, so that's my review here. Overall, I think it was worth my money. You can see it's a nice thick book. It has a number of beautiful pictures in it and things to follow. I think it'll be an important desk reference for people in the community to go be able to pull out. Unfortunately, I think if you are looking to be able to guess a CGC grade of a comic book directly in front of you using this as the book, I think you're going to be disappointed, because the ranges that are provided are enormous, and there's not enough clarity really for you to be able to narrow it even significantly within that range. So like I said, I think the staining range is literally 1.0 to 9.8, and there's not enough clarity for you to be able to guess, you know, how big of a stain or how severe of a stain is going to hit which grade threshold within there. And so that, I think, is a disappointing reality of the book. But all in all, I'm happy with it. So if you enjoyed this and got some use out of it, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. Please go ahead and find me on Instagram or Facebook and share it with your friends. Thank you.